About a week ago on Wednesday, last Wednesday on the 19th, I warned you about this divergence. At the top, I warned you there was going to be a pullback, but I continue to warn this is not the top. Okay, this is a pullback. Over the weekend, I talked about the 4 different possibilities. 2 of those counts have now been invalidated. So we have it down to 2 counts. I'll show you. One is that we're about to bottom, or just did. We could bottom this week with Nvidia earnings. I told you last week we could bottom this week. That's very, very possible if one of the more shallow retracements plays out, which I'll show you in just a second. A bigger sell-off. Minor wave 4 is not yet done, and we would take out the January 13th low. I told you I didn't think that would happen, but I showed you the different counts, and again, I told you the shallow retracement counts are the ones that I expect are going to play out. 2 of them have validated now. 1 of them is left, and then we have a deeper count that I'll show you. But again, the sell-off that I predicted would happen has happened. It's going to come to a conclusion. I drew this right here, calculating on 5-leg push lower, but we still may take this level out. And I drew this before it happened. It came pretty close because I was expecting a test to that trend line. We still may go down and fill that gap. Just a little bit lower. I'll show you that. And if we do, we may get another reference point of a divergence here. So I think that, again, we're either going to bottom right here or we're going to get one more push down. We rallied up on the 15-minute chart back up to the 50 period, and we stalled there, but we did recover off of the lows of the session. The S&P trying to get a bottoming tail. So again, it's possible you have a bullish divergence here that's now completed this bottom. This divergence gave us a bounce, which again is what I was expecting over here, but then I was expecting another push down. We did get it. We went beyond the trend line, which again, I talked about that possibility. I think is the count that is now in play, and I'll show you that to you in a moment. But again, the pullback that I predicted would happen, I think is coming to a conclusion down here. Now, if I'm wrong about that, I've shown you that other count, the deeper count, where again, we go back and take out that January low. Minor wave 4 is not done. I'll show you all of that in just 1 second. We're getting this sell-off right here in the 15-minute chart. We're getting this topping tail on the VIX. And again, I told you over the weekend and then again yesterday, we could see a bottom Tuesday or Wednesday with the stock market and even with Bitcoin if we got a pullback with Nvidia and we tried to rally with the Nvidia earnings. Now, if we sell off with Nvidia earnings, pull below the 200 period moving average, then we could get that bigger sell-off scenario I've talked about. And I told you, I'm showing you that scenario. I don't think it's going to play out, but again, I don't want to rule it out. I told you the scenarios that I thought would play out, I still think they're in play. One of them is 2 of them have now been invalidated. Those counts in just a minute. We get a topping tail here on the VIX. So again, could we have put in a bottom today or go a little bit lower to that gap fill on the S&P, which I'll show you in just a moment. Make sure you watch the video all the way through. You want to see this stuff. We may see the VIX drop back below the trend line. We did get above it, but we got a topping tail above the upper band here. So again, we'll be watching to see if we drop back down with this topping tail here. Now, we have Nvidia earnings coming on the 26th after the bell, okay, which is tomorrow. So again, I told you that last week when we were getting those negative divergences on the 15-minute chart, the 30-minute chart, the 60-minute chart, that Nvidia was up here at this trend line and filling the gap and stalling there. And then now we've seen a sell-off since I told you about that. And again, I told you we can get a retracement, and that could build momentum ahead of earnings. Now, if we're coming down to the 200, I talked about that, testing the 200 period moving average. If we can build momentum surrounding earnings or go a little bit lower and build momentum, whatever, then I think that we could break out here and you can go back up and test this trend line or that longer term trend line that we talked about. It's the same area going all the way back with all the data we have on Nvidia. Now, if we lose the 200 period, stay below it, that's going to be very bearish for Nvidia. If we drop below it, then get back above it, that's going to be bullish. Right today, we dropped below it and we bounced at the 200 period. That could be bullish as well. But as what I'm watching is, can we put in a tradable bottom for Nvidia, and that could give us the next rally. I don't think the S&P is topped yet. And again, could it be Nvidia that gives us the catalyst for the next rally, or some good news on the tariffs? The market's getting bad news on sentiment and concerns that we're going to get these tariffs 1 week from now going into place with Canada and Mexico. We had that before, and there was a pause. Pause is coming to a conclusion here at the beginning of March. I think it's March 4th, 1 week from now. That's next Tuesday. So again, we'll see what happens. Again, could there be more concessions out of Canada and Mexico that causes the president to delay that? Do we get it and the market shrugs it off? We'll see what happens. And then we're going to get those other tariffs. We're going to get the information. I talked about this in yesterday's video. We're going to get the information. The president's going to have it on his desk April 1st. That doesn't mean that the reciprocal tariffs are going to start April 1st. They could start shortly thereafter. There might be a date given in the future, maybe later in the month, mid-April or late April. We don't know. Trump did that with the tariffs on Canada and Mexico on Inauguration Day. He postponed it until February 1st. So we'll see what happens with that. Remember, though, coming down the pike now is the tax cuts, the renewal of the 2017 tax cuts, if they extend them, which it looks like they're going to do, with the channel with the link directly below that allows me to be able to provide you this information. If you like the charts, you like the indicators, let me know that by supporting the channel today. If you could follow the link below, it'll take you to a secured site. You could donate any amount you want or make it a recurring donation. But if you could take a moment to do that, I would really, really appreciate it. Thank you for your consideration for that. Now again, here we hit the VWAP support level right on the nose right here. We violated this VWAP support, which was from our recent lows over here, and we're hitting the VWAP support right over here, which goes further back, horizontal support, and that rising trend line. If we go lower, there's more VWAP support down here at the CPI gap fill and our 78.6 Fibonacci. We're bouncing here in the daily time frame, and you saw it on that 60-minute chart. We're bouncing right here at the 61.8 Fibonacci, just below this low over here where we back tested the bull flag. Zoom out here. Sorry, it's a little messy if I zoom out, but you can see that the VWAP support that we're coming into right here is from the September low. Okay, and if we violate that, these other support levels are from the July peak. They're anchored from the July peak and from the August low. So it's the volume weighted average price from those anchored points. So we're hitting an interesting level of support, but right below, again, there is more support right in here with our CPI gap and the January low right there. So we'll see if this level can hold that we're trying to test right now. And again, that's where a rising trend line is coming in to play. So I think you got a pretty good shot that we try to bounce right here. But if we don't, you still have the count in play, the Elliott wave count, as long as we get a higher low holding above the January low. And if we just fill the CPI gap, I don't know that we go that low. I was looking for a bottom this week, got a good shot of that Tuesday or Wednesday surrounding the trend line of support, which we're now hitting and violating and getting the bottoming tail at that level. Now we had the Dow up. The Dow was up almost 160 points, up 0.37. S&P, the fourth consecutive down day. VIX had predicted today would be an up day. The VIX was incorrect. Again, there was an 85% chance of a 15% chance of a down day of a failure, and it ended up failing. The signal failed. But we got that topping tail on the VIX, which could produce a tradable bottom. S&P was down 28 points, down almost 0.5% to 59.55. The Nasdaq lost 1.35%, and the Russell was down 0.38%. It's forming a bullish diversion surrounding that 200-period moving average. If it rallies back up again, it could be completing a larger ABC move. I talked about that yesterday. The VIX was up 2.3% to close at 19.43. Still relatively low. And remember, just topped last week on very bearish sentiment, which is continuing. And we only got up to the 50 level on the fear greed index, which again is a neutral reading. And now we are yesterday at fear, at extreme fear. Again, Isn't what tops form on. Tops form on euphoria and complacency and fear of missing out and greed, or sometimes extreme greed. With the fear greed index, the tops don't form on bearish sentiment, which is what we just had. Tops don't form with the fear greed index at neutral or fear, which is what we just had. And I believe this is a pullback, and I think it's the advance is going to resume in the near future here. And I told you, I thought we'd see a bottom this week in all likelihood. And if we get that, one of my scenarios got invalidated today, the other one previously, and so I'm down to my third short-term sell-off one. I think that will still likely be in play here, and I think it will play out. Trump rattling the markets late yesterday with the concerns about the tariffs going forward being unpaused on next week on March 4th. The consumer confidence, that disappoints, and again, the Nvidia pullback, getting this sell-off. The consumer confidence came in weaker than expected. Now, this isn't the one out of Michigan. This is the one from the Conference Board. Both weakening, okay? And they're both, these signals are predicting recession is coming. Later in the week, it's going to be about Nvidia. It's going to be about the inflation data. Remember, our inflation reports came in hot with the PPI and the CPI. We're going to get the PCE later in the week. And let me just scroll down here and show you that real fast. We're going to get that on Friday. We're going to get the PCE inflation data. Remember, the CPI was supposed to come in cool, and it came in hot. Got the same thing here. The PCE is supposed to come in cool. It's supposed to be 2.5% year over year, below the 2.6. On the core number, it's supposed to be 2.6 lower than the 2.8. That was the same way with the CPI, but it didn't play out that way, and we got that hot CPI, PPI data, the wholesale inflation, gapped lower with the CPI, and then the market pretty much shrugged it off, tickled to death that Trump was postponing the reciprocal tariffs, implementing them immediately. There was a delay, so we're testing the trend line from the 2023 low. The trend line from the 2023 low, we slightly violated it in January. I was predicting we would bounce off of that trend line, which we did do, and bottom. We're still holding above that January low. Again, I talked about coming back and testing this trend line again. We're doing that. We're slightly violating it. Now, we're violating it because I'm keeping the trend line originally from this low here to this low here. If we include this level, well, we still violated it, but not as much. If I adjust it right here, you can see if we just adjust that and include that low, again, we've slightly violated it. I think we're going to bounce off this area and still move higher, as I continue to say. Nothing has changed in my mind. I still think we're in minor wave 5. If I adjust it here, again, we're coming right to that trend line for a test and slightly violating it like we did in January. So I think we're going to, by the end of the week, likely find a bottom. As I've said last week, and as I said Monday, I think you're going to bottom either Tuesday or Wednesday. I think you've really got a good shot of that happening. Could I be wrong? Yeah, I'm showing you what will happen. If I'm wrong about that minor wave 4 was never done right here, that we still go lower, my guess is that's not going to be the case. And I think you're going to still go up into this area. Nothing has changed. Had a failed breakout at the highs, and we're building momentum and consolidating further to get the next push higher, in my opinion. Forming the negative, multiple point negative diversions is here. This is telling us a top is coming. But like I said with the January low, and like I said last few videos here, again, I think we're going to try to bounce surrounding this trend line. I told you last week I thought we would bottom this week. You got a good shot of that happening on Tuesday or Wednesday. So we may have seen the bottom today, or maybe Wednesday we go a little bit lower, but I think you got a good shot that we bottom out this week. Even if we don't do it on Tuesday, Wednesday, I think you got a good shot it's going to happen. Find out that the tariffs with Canada and Mexico are postponed again. On pause again. Maybe they make further concessions. Who knows? Do we get good tariff news that gives us a rally? Do we get Nvidia helping out the Nasdaq? Do we get good news on the tax cuts? The catalyst may be, or maybe a combination of things. Again, I think you're going higher, but then I think you're going to top, and I think you're going to get this 20% drop back down to this trend line here once we top out. I think we've topped yet, but I think we're just pulling back, and we're going to try to bounce surrounding this trend line. the pullback that I predicted is happening from last Wednesday, and I'm predicting that we're going to try to bottom this week. I think you got a good shot at that. We'll see if that happens. Talked about this diversions, talked about the sell-off, be coming to a conclusion. We had a failed breakout, and to be watching that if we sold off, to be watching certain levels around the trend line was that 100 period and the cloud, and that's where we're hitting right now. We did break this trend line from the January low, slightly took out this level. That invalidated one of my counts. Count got invalidated on Monday, but down to 2 counts, and I think again we could still come back and fill this gap over here, this gap area right here, which I'll talk about that in a moment. Talked about the failed breakout back up here. Now we've seen this sell-off, and again we still have the 10 and 20 above the 50, and the 10 is still above the 20, believe it or not, and we get a potential bottoming tail here today. So again, we'll be watching what happens surrounding our 100 period and our cloud right here and our trend line. Stochastic, again, do we go a little bit lower and then recycle back up? Do we have a bottom in here that's tested, or do we go a little bit lower than that and maybe try to fill the gap? And that's what I'm going to be watching. Let me show you the scenarios I was talking about. I had 4. I'm going to show you 3 of them due to time. This is the one that I was looking at that, hey, we finished the subwave 2 over here, and now we're starting wave 3, but we took out this low, so that count got invalidated. I told you some of these counts are going to get invalidated. Now, we turned down and we still got above. We closed right there at the trend line. So again, still think you got a good shot at trying to bounce off that trend line. If we don't, we have the CPI gap fill over here. And again, this is the CPI gap fill at 58.43, 58.43. If we end up going lower. Now, again, today's bottoming tail may be it. We got a topping tail on the VIX. We got a bottoming tail on the S&P. Last week, I was looking for a bottom this week. I told you that, again, bottom Tuesday or Wednesday. Nvidia reports after hours, after the closing bell on Wednesday. So I told you we could bottom this week, and it could be Tuesday or Wednesday. And that's what I've been talking about last week and this week. Still think that's very, very possible. So this count is now invalidated because you can't move. Wave 2 can't move below wave 1. So this count is gone. Okay, but my other count is still very, very much in play. And if it plays out, we could see a really good March on into an April high. And it could be if Trump gets the information on the tariffs on April 1st, maybe he waits a couple weeks, implement them, or maybe negotiations happen that pauses or delays them. Yeah, maybe he applies maximum pressure to where Euroland and some of these other countries, maybe they start getting rid of some of these tariffs, and maybe the maximum strategy works. Don't know. But again, you're going to get an inflation freakout surrounding the tariffs. I think you're going to get an inflation freakout with inflation ticking back up. I think the stock market will peak, it'll drop 20%, and then the Fed will panic. It's all coming ahead. But again, let me be clear. I do not believe the stock market has topped yet. I do not believe that. What could be the catalyst? The tax cuts? Maybe they're negotiations surrounding the tariffs. Maybe there's further delay or a pause with the Mexico and Canada tariffs going into place next week. Supposed to be unpaused by next week on the 4th, March 4th. Watching, but what could give us a catalyst? Or Nvidia, could that start the ball rolling? We'll see how it unfolds. This is my count right here, where again we finished minor wave 4 over here, and we got in wave 1. Again, we predicted the bottom off of the trend line from 2023, and I told you we could test it again, and which we are doing. But rather than the wave 2 completing over here, as I've talked about, again, this count would have it not be done yet, and we have an A and a B and maybe a C, or maybe a C down here to fill the CPI gap, and then we go on our way. Remember, when we came down to the January low, we went back and we filled the gap from the election, and I told you I thought we had a continuation of the election rally, so maybe we still go a little bit lower. We'll be watching the bottoming tail, but we did take out this low, which again, remember, we're going to get a sell-off in December. We got it. We went sideways. Told you if the triangle broke down, we get a bigger sell-off to come back and fill this gap. We did that. Told you that I thought on January 9th and 10th we were going to bottom. We bottomed the very next day after the 10th on the 13th, Monday the 13th, at the trend line. I told you I thought we'd fill the gap and bounce off the trend line. That was correct. We got the rally. I told you the head and shoulders everybody was all concerned about. I told you it was a fake pattern, and we had the bull flag, and we got the rally. We went a little bit higher here. Had failed breakouts above the December peak, which I talked about. We were going to back test the bull flag. We got the deep seek sell-off. We didn't reach it. We got the rally back up. We formed a bear flag on the 60-minute chart. I told you we were still going to go lower right here, and we did. And we ended up back testing with the hammer there, which, again, we got another hammer today. A bottoming tail, a hammer candlestick. I told you right here, when we were rallying up, we were either going to pull back and get a higher low or lower low. Here I told you I wasn't sure. Here I told you I was sure. We were going to bottom and rally. Here I told you I was sure we were going to pull back. Here I told you I was sure that we were still going to go lower. And when we rallied back up and got the lower high, I told you again, we're going to go lower. I was correct on that. Here I told you I wasn't sure. I always try to tell you exactly what I'm thinking. And when I don't know, I try to tell you that. I do think we were going higher, but I told you I didn't know if we were going to get a higher low or lower low. I told you, well, we got that higher low right here. I said, well, maybe that's it. But then we got the failed breakout. So I told you on last Wednesday, we were going to pull back. And if we pull back, we could still test this low and test the trend line. Well, we took out the trend line ever so slightly today, got a bottoming tail, and we took out that low ever so slightly today. So maybe it's done with the bottoming tail, and we bounce off this trend line yet again, but there's still the possibility of filling the CPI gap right here and holding above the January low. Now, the other possibility is we get a bigger sell-off and we take out the January low. I think that's possible, and I don't want to dismiss that possibility. I think it's less likely. So again, the more shallow retracement I think is more likely. I had 3 possibilities. 2 of them were eliminated. This one is left, so I think that this is either going to bottom out here or come down and fill the gap fill at 58.43 and then bottom out, one or the other. I'm looking for a bottom this week, and I told you I think it's very possible we bottom on Tuesday and Wednesday. I'm sticking with that. So again, maybe we got the bottom today. I told you I thought that would be the case. We recovered off of the lows, tried to bounce off of the trend line after breaching it. So again, everything I've been telling you about this week, I think is happening, that we would go lower. I told you that last Wednesday, but then I think we're going to bottom, and one of those scenarios I told you. Now, again, I could be wrong, and we could take up the January low, but again, I just have the guts to tell you what I think. Bitcoin did take out the January low, but I've talked about that possibility too. But I think Bitcoin is in a bottoming process as well, and I talked about those possibilities with Bitcoin. Eventually, I think they're both moving higher, and we got a really good shot that we can bottom out this week. Maybe that's with the Nvidia earnings. Maybe that's with possibly good news on the tariffs. Got before with the CPI gap back over here at this low right here, which we got another hammer. That was, we got the CPI data, we gapped lower, but then we rallied back up, shrugged off the bad PPI, hot inflation, and we rallied because Trump wasn't going to implement the reciprocal tariffs immediately. And so we rallied on that, but then we've had this failed breakout at this trend line. So that's where we stand. I think this count is likely. I got my C and 2 right here. Maybe it's down here at 58.43 and we fill the gap and go just above that anywhere low. Today we're bouncing off the 61.8 Fibonacci. Maybe we go down and fill the gap and hit the 78.6 Fibonacci, but this is what I think is likely in play. And then again, I think that probably takes us into April, maybe into mid-April or something. We may hear from Trump a date for the new tariffs to kick in, and again, it may be. If we rally into that date, I think there's a very good chance, but I think you're going to have a very good March. And I think that's going to spill over on into April, where I think you're going to see this peak and the rising wedge complete. Now, again, if I'm wrong on this and we don't have minor wave 4 here and it hasn't finished, possibility, my guess, though, is we have minor wave 4 done. We have the first 2 subwaves of minor wave 5 here in play. I think wave 2 is coming to a conclusion, and then I think we're going to get that subwave 3, 4, and 5, and I think that will give us the peak up here somewhere at much higher levels. So I remain longer term bullish, but short term, again, last Wednesday I predicted we would get a pullback, likely to test the trend line. and to test this low, either getting a higher low or lower low, which we now have. We got a lower low. So again, we'll see if it's done. Now, if this is wrong, we have one other possibility. We have two possibilities now. This, again, either minor wave 4 is done, and we're now getting, our wave 5, and we're getting these first two waves, these first two subwaves of that minor wave 5, or minor wave 4 had never finished. While this count is still very possible, I think it's less likely. I don't want to rule it out. Now, this count would take us back towards the January low and towards the 200 period moving average, a black line right there, and again, take us lower. And this count would say that minor wave 4 didn't finish over here, but it's still this larger formation. You'd have minor wave 1, minor wave 2, minor wave 3, and then 4 would be way over here, and then we get the minor wave 5. I think this is less likely. I think that minor wave 4 likely already completed here, and we're starting the first two subwaves of that minor wave 5. So again, tell you what I think. Don't want to rule this out. And again, it's my opinion. I think we're going to bounce surrounding the 100 period like we did over here at the January low, like we did over here. And here we violated it at the August low, but we bounced off it at the September low and bounced off of it at the January low. I think you're going to bounce off the 100 period here again. Even if we don't do it immediately, we could still just fill the gap and then do it. But I think you're going to try to bounce surrounding this trend line. We'll see what the end of the week looks like. All this count is in play. I think it's less likely. I think this count is, whoops, let me adjust that. I think this count is likely in play right here. We have a 4-day losing streak. Coming back to the areas where I thought we would, the trend line here, about the more mild pullback or something bigger if we try to take out the January low, which I think is less likely. I think we bottomed this week, and I think you got to bottom either today or tomorrow. Got a good chance of it. And again, I have the guts to tell you what I think. Most people won't do that. Most people tell you things. Like when we started to sell off, what I told you back at the peak right here, you're going to get a pullback with those divergences on the 30-minute chart, on the 15-minute chart, hourly chart. Most people tell you things after they predict things after they already happen. Again, I'm telling you, I think we're going to bottom here probably Tuesday or Wednesday. I think a good shot this plays out. I told you last Wednesday we were going to sell off. Told you about the January top, the January bottom, the divergence at December. Signals have been absolutely amazing. Here's my count that just got invalidated on the 60-minute chart. And again, told you if this was wave 2 over here, this first subwave being done over here, well then we're in wave 3 and we got the 1 and the A and the B and then the C, which again, we move below this low. So that invalidates, we move below 59.23. That invalidates this count. So now, rather than 2 being over here, the subwave 2 over here, now, let me just change it here. Rather than 2 being over here, now it's this A, B, and now this C. And maybe it's done, again, possible 5 waves complete here, or this might be 3 right here, down here, and this whole thing 3 right here. And then we get 4, and then we get 5, maybe coming closer to filling the CPI gap or close but no cigar, or maybe we come down to it. We'll be watching, but we did get a bottoming tail. Got it here on the 60-minute chart, a couple of bottoming tails here. Got a bottoming tail on the daily chart. The bottom very well could be in, and I told you I thought we'd get a bottom S&P in all likelihood on Tuesday. It could go into Wednesday, but I told you I thought it would be Tuesday, but I told you last week that we would likely bottom this week, and I told you it would be Tuesday or Wednesday, and I was leaning towards Tuesday, so it's very possible we have now the bottom in. How many people would have the guts to tell you that? And look at these divergences. Again, the divergences in December here on the 60-minute charts, and the multiple point divergence that marked our gap fill at for the election, and the bottom, the trend line of support, the bearish divergence gave us the pullback. The bullish divergence that gave us that bounce there, that gave us some rally, and then this divergence that has given us this sell-off. Absolutely amazing divergences on the 60-minute charts. If you don't use a 60-minute chart, I highly recommend you get one, but pretty remarkable. And again, the signals on the MACD as well. Now, we don't have a bullish cross on the MACD. It may be that we just bottom out and get it, or again, we may end up seeing a divergence develop here as well as the larger diversions. We do have a little diversions here on the 60-minute chart for our lows today. It may be that we build upon that and get a larger diversions and the MACD still forms one. That's why I say we still may come down and try to fill this gap. And that's why I told you, I think that, again, while we're bottom this week, if wave 2 did not finish right here, this second subwave, again, it could come down and try to fill the gap at 58.93, 58.93. Sorry, 58.43, pardon me, 43. 58.43 is that gap fill from the CPI over here. So we'll be watching to see if this now comes to a conclusion. A small little diversions here on the 60-minute chart. Momentum remains bearish. We got a bearish reversal of conditions with momentum here on the daily chart for the S&P. We're hitting our 61-point Fibonacci. Again, we'll be watching lower levels, but we're hitting the trend line. We'll see if we can try to bounce off of it. We drift a little bit lower and try to bottom out. We'll be watching closely, but I think you got a good shot of a bottom this week. See what happens with Nvidia earnings. See what happens on the tariff front. I think we had the failed breakout with Nasdaq. Momentum remains bearish from last Friday with our failed breakout, and we're below the 50-period moving average. We'll be watching to see if the awesome oscillators start trying to tick back up. Do the MACDs firm up, try to firm back up around the center lines? I have these bearish divergences on the intraday charts, and they played out beautifully. And again, I warned you about that last Wednesday before we got the sell-off. We had the same thing on the Nasdaq. This is the S&P 60-minute chart. Nasdaq 60-minute chart had the same diversions. We talked about that. And again, now we've seen this drop. Here we have a gap down here at 20,759, which is the CPI gap fill back from January. So again, we'll be watching that level. That's directly below. We're coming back and testing these lows over here right now and moving just slightly below that area. You break this trend line right here. And again, now becoming oversold, but there's no diversions present here. There may not be. We didn't have one here. Other times you haven't had it, but other important turning points you have at the top over here in December, the bottom over here in January. You had multiple points of diversions. Always form, but something worth paying attention to, and that's why I say we still may try to go a little bit lower. But watch this gap right here at 20,759. If we do end up going lower on Nasdaq, Nasdaq was down 1.25% today, down 265 points today. Again, we've given back all of the recent rally here, come back to these lows right here. We broke this trend line from the January low, but the failed breakout from the December peak on the Nasdaq, again, the negative diversions did play out and gave us this sell-off. The question is it going to come to a conclusion? And if so, does Nasdaq still attempt to go make new highs? Again, just like the S&P, we're down at the 100-period moving average, our cloud. Remember, I talked about coming back into this area, and again, warned you last week about the sell-off. Being something bigger, we have the gap fill down here, and then we have also the gap fill from the election if we end up getting something really, really ugly. As I said, I think we're going to try to bottom this week, and then we'll see if Nasdaq can try to make new highs or not. Failed breakout, again, that I talked about before the sell-off happened, again, a huge warning sign that we were going to sell off, and we talked about that before the sell-off ever began. And I warned you about the divergences and the failed breakouts here, all of that stuff last week. Talked about it with the divergences on Wednesday, talked about it more with the test of the 10 period on Thursday, but talked about the failed breakout, the Nasdaq and the S&P. I talked about this trend line, which we did breach today on the S&P, testing that 100-period moving average. Again, this is from the January low, from the August low to the January low there. So again, watching what happens surrounding the 100-period. Here's the gap fill, again, directly below 20,700 range. Below that, we have the election gap fill. We never did fill that near the 200 period here at 20,227. We'll be watching to see if we attempt a recovery after a 4-day losing streak for the Nasdaq and the S&P 500.